Hey, folks, thanks for joining the podcast. This is the Business Growth Strategy and Execution podcast with Howie and Beastmode. I am your co-host, Howie, and Beastmode, thanks for joining, obviously, as well.
Hey, Howie. Great to see you. Thank you for having me.
Great to see you, of course. So we have a special guest today, actually, Brian Kendig, who I've known for a lot of years. Brian has a very interesting background with business management, business leadership, working in startups, being advisors to executives, and a lot of pretty interesting stories. He has a pretty interesting story that I think will help everybody learn and grow and avoid risk, whether it's in a startup or in a already established business. So Brian, thank you so much for joining.
Well, thank you for having me.
So I know we've been talking and kind of preparing for this, and one of the things that was pretty interesting about your story was that you worked for a particular startup organization in a position of leadership and operations. So maybe tell us a little bit about, tell us a little bit about your background before that, who you are a little bit, and then kind of tee up sort of that story of operational management.
Sure. So I tell people I've been doing cybersecurity for about 30 years. Most of the roles that I've done have been either directly in sales as a individual contributor or closely related to sales in operations or support roles, leadership roles. So the flavor of the companies that I've worked for have all had the flavor of cybersecurity, but they've been different size organizations, different types of organizations. Some of them more on the fringes of cybersecurity, but all technology related. And I've been doing that for a lot of years. I think the scenario you and I talked about in depth that we'll talk more about tonight is one that was with a startup organization, and it has a lot to do with communication. I think that organizations, no matter the size, will benefit from understanding how to communicate. And I've had a lot of since this time with this startup, had a lot of good formal training on communications and leadership. I think leadership is 90% communication. Good leaders know how to communicate well. So it's an issue that is close and dear to my heart as well.
Absolutely. So what was your role in that startup environment?
So it was a smaller company, and with most small companies, you have to wear a lot of hats. And one of the hats that I wore, in addition to a sales hat, was an operations role. And that really was operations for the entire company. Now, it was probably non-traditional in the sense of operations that we didn't have manufacturing operations. We didn't have, it was a cybersecurity company that provided software and services. So there wasn't a lot of manual type of processes or tangible product that we needed to oversee, but there were a lot of systems processes and operations. And so I was very close to that on a day-to-day basis. And one of the things as being part of that, finance was another piece that was very close. We had a finance team, but I had to work very closely with the finance team in order to make sure that money flowed correctly, cash flow was handled properly, because you have to time all that stuff properly in order to make acquisitions and make investments as you need to, so that you don't find yourself cash strapped and scrambling to try and find money somewhere, which for a small company that can be a very big hit. And so we're always very cognizant of that on a daily basis to make sure that we weren't putting ourselves in a position where we had a couple of days of zero cash on hand. That was just an unacceptable thing. But I took it upon myself. It was at the direction of my leadership, but I took it upon myself to make sure I understood those numbers very, very well, and projected out beyond just 30 or 60 or 90 days. I was looking typically 6 to 12 months in advance and making the best forecasts that I possibly could for the business to make sure that everything was whole and healthy. We had one particular case where we had made an investment that it was a needed investment, but at my level, I was concerned that it looked like it was maybe an overinvestment, that we were putting ourselves in a position where in 6 to 8 months, we were going to be in that position that I was just talking about, where we were going to have days or weeks with probably zero cash on hand. It didn't mean that the business was necessarily doomed. It just meant that we were going to find ourselves in a very, very difficult position. So I communicated this to leadership, and they, their response back to me was, "Hey, it'll be okay. We've got some things. We're making changes. We're adding new services. So don't worry about it. We'll do fine." And that, I was okay with that. And then as I didn't see the changes getting the business changes getting the desired effect on the books and on the operations, I came back and I said, "Guys, we're still in this same spot that we were a month ago." And so I was raising alarms. It wasn't really, I wasn't jumping up on desks and stomping my feet kind of alarm, but I was letting folks know that, hey, here's the position that we're in. And then lo and behold, several months go by, we're still headed down the same path. And I am going into offices uninvited at this point and saying, we're danger close. Things are not going to go well. And we're going to have some difficult things that we have to answer for if we don't turn the ship around and either divest ourselves of some of these things that we had invested in, or figure out how we get the cash flow to come in faster. So as it turned out, it was a little bit longer horizon than 8 months. It ended up being closer to 10 or 12 months, but sure enough, the business was put in an untenable position where if anybody has worked in or run a small business, as you know, you can get yourself into a snowball that doesn't seem like you're going to find the bottom of the hill, because things tend to cascade on top of themselves, and secondary and tertiary circumstances compound the situation that you're in. And that's what happened with this particular company. So they had to go through some very painful transitions, downsizings, right sizings, whatever you want to call that. But it was something that I tried to communicate and was not received well. Now, let me also set the stage that the folks that I was working with were very capable, intelligent people. They didn't, it's not that they lacked the ability to do what needed to be done. I think that the message itself was just not something that they were willing to hear or wanted to receive at that time. So this is one thing how you and I talked about, is, what is it about the message? And so I've thought about that over the years, and there's probably some things that I could have done differently. But ultimately, what I felt, how I can sleep at night, is knowing that I had visibility into what the facts and the truth was, and I conveyed that to the best of my ability to the people who are responsible.
Yep. Got it. So you basically saw some overspending that was basically, you projected that it would result in a shortfall.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. And you convey the message quite early. And sure enough, down the road, 10, 12 months, basically that did come home, and that did actually happen. Now, do you think, I know from my standpoint, I sometimes feel that I share feedback, but because I have an agreeable personality, I sometimes find that it's so critical for me to not lose the person in the delivery that sometimes I shortchange the delivery a little bit. Versus, for example, I might have seen the Enron problem happen and report it, but I might not have stood on the table like the whistleblower did for Enron, right? And so that's, do you feel like sometimes we're a little too agreeable in the way we deliver, and because we don't want to, kind of burn a bridge or make someone feel stupid or whatever, unpack that as much as you want, but do you sometimes feel that since it's not a life-threatening issue where we probably would scream, not where we would scream, do you feel like we sometimes undersell the punchline?
You know, I think we do, and I know that I tend to do that. I do have that agreeable personality that I want to be part of the team. I want to support the team, and I want things to go well. And so sometimes my tendency will be to not ruffle feathers, especially if it's people that I like. I will, like I did maybe in those early months, just say, oh, okay, well, they seem confident, they have it well in hand. So, I'm not going to go beat them up about it. And a couple of things that I think came out of that changed me, that I learned and I've grown from, are it's not just the message itself. It's to me it's very much like the parable of the seeds in the Bible, where some seeds fall on hard ground and don't grow. Some seeds fall on shallow ground and they sprout up very quickly, but then they wither and die. And then some seeds land on good soil and they produce a good crop. What I see is that the message is that seed. The seed doesn't change. The seed is still the seed. The message is still the message, but the people are different, right? So you have to think of people as the type of soil here. And so one of the things I've learned is I need to communicate the same message different ways to different people. And when I look back at the personality types of the people that were running the organization at that time, I'll give you for example. One of the guys was a very type A, just give me the bottom line kind of guy. And I would walk in with, a stack of papers and details that just, he would glaze over, and he's just like, these numbers don't mean that much to me. I need to understand what the bottom line here is. And I'm trying to beat him up with details. And then another gal in the company who is very much the detail person, I walk in and say, here's the bottom line. So the message didn't change. The facts were the facts. The difference was I wasn't giving the right style of communication to be heard as effectively as I possibly could.
Interesting. Sometimes these people who are dynamic, who are the heads of companies, for them to be the head of a company, they tend to have a certain amount of personality. They tend to have a certain amount of dynamism. And so they're kind of believable. And so it almost, when they assure you, that what you're saying operationally with your management and your operational ability, Brian, when they kind of calm you down and sort of say it's going to be okay and everything, they tend to be sort of believable, and you sort of question yourself. At least that's been my personal experience.
Sure. And I think too, at that time in my career, didn't have as many years under my belt. I think now that, like I said, 20 plus years working in the same industry, were I to be in that position, or the Brian now to be in that position those years ago, I certainly would have been firmer, because I would have come from a place of a little bit more confidence to be able to buck heads with that type A personality and say, listen, I've been there. I know what's going to happen. I'm not telling you I think this is going to happen. I'm telling you, I know this is going to happen. So some of it is experience. It's not necessarily experience with a lot of years. It's just an experience of having been there, done that, no matter how old you are, to have the confidence to be willing to buck heads with somebody and say, listen, this is the reality. And I'm, rather than the way that I walked in and said, hey guys, I see bad things coming if we don't change them, and here are the numbers that support what I say. I had data on my side, didn't necessarily have my own confidence on my side. I think maybe things might have turned out a little bit differently had I walked in with the same message delivered in a little bit different way.
That's a good point. Well, it's a good thing that you did try to convey the message and try to help them save the business. What would you do differently in that situation?
Yeah, I kind of alluded to it. I think I would try and understand my leaders, my peers, and if I have any, my subordinates. I would try and understand as intimately as I possibly could, what is their communication style? What resonates with them? How do they want to hear things? How can I express things in a way that are effective for them? I pointed out 2 different types. There's, many different personality types, but in general, you can put a lot of people into those two types of buckets, the ones that like details and the ones that just want the bottom line. And that, if you don't know somebody well enough, you might be able to put them into those 2 types of buckets to learn how to communicate better. But that's what I would do different, is I would learn how those people communicate, how they receive information best, and try and always tailor my message in a way that I feel confident that they're going to hear it more effectively.
Brian, did you deliver the same message to each individual the same way whenever you brought it to them?
I really did. I think I walked in. I walked into people. Sometimes the message was about different aspects of the organization, because I'm talking to different people, but it was all the same set of numbers. Literally was a stack of printouts and Excel spreadsheets, and said, hey, here are the numbers. And here's the future that we're headed towards based on these numbers. And so the message really didn't change from all of that. There were a lot of numbers that I had to try and convey. But I instead of thinking, okay, now I'm walking into Tom's office, I should think about how I need to give the message to Tom. And now I'm walking into Sue's office, and now I should think about how I'm giving the message to Sue. And then to add complexity on top of that, when you get to the point when you have 5 or 6 people, all stakeholders in the company, that are in the meeting at the same time, how do you convey to an audience, a mixed audience, right? It gets a little bit more challenging there.
Yeah, there's a book that I recently read by Shel Rose Charvet. It's called Words That Change Minds. And it's so fantastic. I actually heard her on a podcast talking with another gentleman, and she was talking about there's 14 different ways that in society in general that we have learned to receive a call to action. And so it was more directly for marketing that if you're only using the same call to action, you're going to miss out on the other 13 different type groups that are listening, because they're not hearing that call to action. And it just really resonated me that even whenever it comes to feedback, that I can't take the same feedback to multiple different people, because again, based on her work that's based on neuropathology, what it shows is that each individual person, up to 14 different types, receives information differently. And so for us, as communicators, we got to learn to not only communicate effectively, but diversify how we communicate. That way we maximize our listeners. What do you think about that?
I think that's spot on, right? I mean, I'm not really surprised to hear the number is 14, because there are so many different, there's so much diversity in human beings. I would be curious to read that book, because I feel like it's something that I could learn from and, make me a better communicator. When you are a better communicator, you're also a better listener. And I'm always striving